Many of you out there have probably become conditioned at this point to believe that Scott Presler registered tens of thousands of voters in 2024 and delivered Pennsylvania for President Trump. Some of you may even believe he registered hundreds of thousands of voters. And some of you believe that Scott Presler registered and transported nearly 200,000 Amish people to vote in 2024, which is incredible, as there aren't even 90,000 Amish people in Pennsylvania, including children. And I really don't blame most of you for believing these things, as they were all part of a massive propaganda campaign leading up to the 2024 election. Because so many of you have been made to believe these falsehoods from seeing them repeated over and over again on social media, you might feel protective of Scott. And I can understand that too. I can understand all of it because I used to feel protective of Scott Presler too. So much so that I bent over backwards to help him in every way that I could because I believed he really was the person that he portrayed himself to be. I too was duped by the propaganda. When I began rising up in 2018, I was instantaneously given a lot of opportunities that, frankly, many people never get. And that was never lost on me. I never wanted to make Walkaway about me. I always wanted it to be about community, teamwork, and using my platform to lift up other people that I thought were talented and effective and deserved a boost. Scott had been doing activism work before I started Walkaway. I admired the person who I believed him to be, and I wanted to do anything within my ability and my power to help lift him higher and help him succeed. And so I began inviting him to speak at as many Walkaway events as possible, ranging from town halls to rallies, galas, and putting him front and center at Walkaway's two major marches and rallies in Washington, D.C.
Do you guys feel it? I am proud to be here with you today. You, every single one of you.
I'm honored to be here at the Unsilent Walkaway March on D.C. Guys, we're making history. This is historic. This is historic!
But that was far from all. From 2018 through to January 6th, I was being asked to go on cable news shows on a weekly basis. And because I felt so blessed and grateful to have these opportunities, I did something that virtually nobody else does. I used my time on these appearances to shout out other people that I didn't think were being given the credit they deserved. And I considered Scott to be one of those people. And so on numerous occasions, I called attention to him and his work on Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, and more.
I love Scott Presler. I have loved Scott Presler for a long time. For anyone who doesn't know, Scott Presler is an amazing conservative activist who goes into Democrat-run cities that have gone completely to hell, and he cleans them up with a group of people. And it's not even a partisan political thing. It's really just about taking care of our country and taking care of our communities.
In 2019, I created my own video series called The Hard Truth. Walkaway's 5-minute videos educating the public on different topics, with a featured speaker in each episode. My episode about liberal media bias was first, and it was shared by President Trump and received over 4 million views. For the follow-up episode, I chose Scott. I flew him all expenses paid to Michigan to shoot the video and spent thousands of dollars creating and editing his episode about voter registration, which we pushed out to our over 1 million followers on social media. When it appeared to me that Scott was struggling financially, I offered him a paid job with Walkaway as an activism leader, which he politely declined, stating that he had secured his dream job with a state GOP, which didn't seem to come to fruition as far as I could tell. That same year, Scott got himself aligned with a manager of sorts who was, to put it mildly, not a good guy. I knew this from my own personal experience, and Scott indicated to me that he was also concerned and wanted out of a signed agreement that he had with this person. Genuinely worried for his well-being, I offered to have my attorney get involved to help free Scott from his contract at my expense. I began to develop a friendship with Laura Trump in early 2019 after she'd seen me in my hour-long interview with Mark Levin on Fox. Laura began to get more involved with Walkaway, and she asked me to speak at a Trump rally in Cincinnati opening for President Trump. A year later, during the 2020 election cycle, I contacted Laura to let her know that I really felt that my friend Scott was not being seen or acknowledged, and that it would mean a lot to me if she would take a meeting with him. She was only partially familiar with him at the time, but told me that she'd be happy to speak to him. A week later, Laura contacted me and told me she had just gotten off the phone with Scott and had a great conversation. And from there, they began to build their own relationship, which made me happy. I'm sure you're now abundantly aware of how Scott now references his friendship with Laura on a regular basis. Immediately after the 2020 election is when I started to see a different side of Scott, and I began to question the person that I had previously believed him to be. A group of over a dozen conservative activists with large social media followings came together to organize rallies in swing states to encourage the public to continue to rally their state legislatures for a forensic audit of the 2020 election. The idea was that we would all host rallies, film footage of our rallies, and post them to social media using the hashtag #StopTheSteal. The agreement we all had was that everybody would share everybody's posts in an effort to amplify the visibility of our mission across the country. Everybody in our group adhered to this agreement, except Scott, who would only post videos of himself speaking at rallies in Pennsylvania and using the messaging, "I'm doing this and I'm doing that" in Pennsylvania. So everybody in our group was posting Scott's videos of his work to our pages, but he would not post videos of our work. Then I announced that I would be moving to Georgia for the month of December to knock doors and organize volunteers for an effort I called Save the Senate. As candidates, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler's seats were up for grabs in the Georgia runoff election on January 5th. Losing these two seats would mean losing our Senate majority. Scott announced on Twitter that he too would be spending December in Georgia, knocking on doors with volunteers. So I asked Scott if he would be willing to coordinate our schedules if we were going to be in the same area at the same time to work together. He gave me some dates and locations that worked with mine, and again announced his plans on Twitter. When it came close to time to coordinate our combined effort dates, I reached out again to begin planning, and Scott told me his plans had changed and that he would now not be in Georgia at that time. I thought, well, that's interesting because you've definitely been telling the public that you're knocking doors in Georgia. So are you going to go on social media and explain now that you're not? And how often is this happening? And the next thing you know, it's January 6th. That day, I was really privileged to be given an incredible seat, front row center for President Trump's speech at the Ellipse. I really couldn't believe it. As I sat there waiting for the event to start, here comes bounding over my friend Scott, who asked me if he could sit next to me to watch President Trump speak. Of course, I said, I'd love to sit next to you. And so Scott sat next to me all morning on January 6th, and of course posted on Twitter about his amazing front row seat, without really ever mentioning how he had ended up there. We separated after the Ellipse and both separately made our way to the Capitol, and you know what happened to me from there. The next day I started to notice something interesting. Scott was posting pictures of himself far away from the Capitol and saying things like, "This is how I spent my day yesterday, hugging my followers." Okay. 2.5 weeks later, I was selected to be raided, arrested, jailed, charged, and persecuted in the J6 witch hunts. And thankfully, Scott was not. Nor were any of the other Stop the Steal activists, and I am eternally grateful for that. I would not wish what I went through for 4 years on anybody. However, if I had been fortunate enough to not be selected for this systematic destruction, and it was happening to one of my friends, wild horses couldn't stop me from standing up for my friends and defending them publicly as they went through this. In fact, I did do that. I was questioned by the FBI and DOJ about all the Stop the Steal activists, and my answers were resoundingly the same. None of these people did anything wrong, and I have no knowledge of any of these people ever committing any crimes, period. And thankfully, none of them ever were visited by the FBI, and none of them were ever charged with any crimes. I heard from Scott about a month or two after I was arrested and jailed. He expressed to me that he had waited to contact me because he thought I needed time. I didn't. I just needed support, and that's what I told him. He told me that if there was anything he could do, I should let him know. And I said yes, there was. I asked him, "Would you please go on social media and say something positive about me?" I told him that I was getting the hell kicked out of me by the media and the left, and that very few people were speaking up for me. He told me that of course he would, and I appreciated that. But it never happened. He never did, and that entire year went by. Then I got a text from him in November saying that he hoped I was okay. I told him that my life was being systematically destroyed, and that the people that I thought were my friends had gone silent while it was happening. He again responded, "Well, if there's anything I can do." And I reminded him that I told him almost a year prior what he could do to help, and he didn't do it. And he didn't say a thing about me after that conversation either. However, the next day after that exchange, Steve Bannon was indicted, and the phrase, "I stand with Steve Bannon," began trending on Twitter. Scott immediately jumped on, posting a picture of himself with Steve, and wrote verbatim, "I stand with Steve Bannon," the exact words that were trending. So he is capable of standing up for people, as long as it's going to help his account get more engagement. And there's no risk of potentially saying something that might be unpopular. To make matters even more strange, despite the fact that Scott unambiguously knew that I was hurt and angry by his lack of support, he began showing up in X spaces where I was speaking and coming up to the speaker box and participating in the conversation, without ever acknowledging that I was there. But what was even more off the wall, Scott was now speaking with a bizarre accent.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work in Philly. It is my intent to go to Chicago and Florida and Milwaukee as well, sometime in like the June time frame. It's going to be awesome.
At first, I thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. He was even going on talk shows now and speaking with a completely different voice than how he really talks.
I am so dedicated and serious to this cause. Yes, so much for democracy. Oh my gosh, the leopards ate my face, you know?
Then the worst thing I've ever been through happened. In the summer of 2022, the DC courts leaked my sealed documents in my case to the media. These were the documents that included the list of names of conservative activists I'd been asked questions about. But when the media printed their stories, they only said that I provided information about these people in order to get a plea deal, implying that I implicated these people, including Scott, in crimes. Instantaneously, I began receiving literally thousands of messages every day for weeks, calling me a rat, a snitch, an informant, and a traitor to MAGA. Nearly every person whose name was on that list of names came forward to my defense, stating that the reports were not true and offering some kind of word of support. Except Scott, who remained completely silent as this was happening to me. This is not a friend. This is somebody who wants to make sure that you never get up again. A year and a half passed, and I continued to be dragged through J6 hell due to the fact that I was also being sued by 8 black and brown Capitol police officers under the KKK Act. This case went on for 2.5 years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to get through. But in December of 2023, I won the case and it officially ended. I took to Twitter to announce my victory, and the phrase, "Congratulations, Brandon," began trending for hours. And for the first time in 3 years, my friend, Scott Presler, acknowledged my existence publicly when he went into the comments under my post and wrote the exact phrase, "Congratulations, Brandon." Literally wrote the exact words that were trending so that his account would show up under that trend. The final exchange I had with Scott was on September 14th, 2024, 2 months before the election. He texted me to ask if a critical post I had made on X was about him. I responded by telling him it wasn't, but I could understand why he would think it was, and I proceeded to remind him of the many, many things I had done to help him, and how in my time of need, I got absolutely nothing from him in return. And despite the fact that Scott was a leading voice in the Stop the Steal movement leading up to January 6th, and despite the fact that Scott wanted so badly to be front row center next to me on January 6th, and despite the fact that Scott did go to Capitol grounds on January 6th, to this day, he has never said or done a single thing to help the thousands of people who were destroyed by January 6th. He just moved on. Which I guess isn't really surprising. In over 4 years, he's never said a single word to acknowledge what happened to me. Scott Presler is all about Scott Presler and nobody else. I concluded that text message to Scott by saying, "The most important thing right now is the election in November. That is precisely the reason I have kept all of this a private matter for almost 4 years. I think there is tremendous value in the fact that good people in this country are inspired by their perception of your public persona. And it's crucial that everybody's focus remain on November." So what is the truth about Scott Presler? I can honestly say I have no idea who or what the real Scott Presler is. But what I know for certain is that the public persona he's created bears little resemblance to who he is in reality. He's not brave. He's not kind. He's not grateful. And he's not honest. The work I do is dangerous and intense and isolating, and it's made me a target by some of the most powerful people in the world. And after everything I've endured for the last 4 years, there is simply no room in my life anymore for anybody on my team who isn't brave, honest, grateful, and kind. The name of this video is The Truth About Scott Presler Part 1. Why? Because I fully anticipate that there will be many of you out there who have fallen so deeply for Scott's absolutely untrue claims about his work and his accomplishments in Pennsylvania. And your belief in these falsehoods is going to allow you to justify that Scott should just get a pass because of all he did. And if that's your belief, I'm happy to make part 2 to this video, debunking just about every claim that Scott made about his impact and results in Pennsylvania, and setting the record straight about all the lies he's told to create one of the biggest propaganda schemes ever pulled on the conservative movement, and all the damage that these lies have caused to the morale of conservative grassroots activists and to our elections.